respected council members, distinguished panelists, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Colonel Pyal Memorial lecture is an extremely important event for the SI because he was a venerated icon among the military scholars, born in 1916 in Lahore and did his law from Oxford University. Before he joined Maratha Light Infantry in 1943. And keeping in view his flair for this kind of a scholarly work, he was the public relation officer of the British Indian Army during the World War II in Burma campaign, subsequent during 47-48 J&K operations and in Hyderabad operations. He was at the helm of affairs of USI from 1957 to 1987, and he died in harness while he was still the secretary cum director of the USI. And he took over the reins of USI 4 years before it moved to Kashmir House from Shimla. As you know, that USI is an autonomous council, and because of our autonomy, we are little bereft of funds because we have to see whether we want to be autonomous or financially dependent. But despite those constraints, because of his leadership qualities and the goodwill that he enjoyed, he was able to steer the USI to be the premium think tank in India and also in Asia. He was also closely associated with the National Defense College, where he was their first GSO-1 from 1960 to 72. And he did a yeoman service there because he was the one who was scouting for the esteemed speakers to come and speak at the USI. And in his honor, there is a medal which is instituted by National Defense College that is called Pyarelal Medal, which is given for the best thesis written by the participants. Now, in the past, we have had the fortune of having his family members, particularly his 95-year-old brother, Mr. Sardari Lal, every year with his wife coming to USI. But since he is not tech savvy and he cannot log in, unfortunately, this year he has not been able to be with us at this digital event. But we wish him good health. He has also got a nephew, Dr. Ajay Lal, who is Director of Critical Care at Max Hospital, and hopefully he would have joined us because we had sent him an invitation. Colonel Pyarelal was not only an iconic head of the USI, but an institution by himself. And he will be revered by the posterity as much as by past and future generations of military and by all military professionals. So with these few words, we'll keep his legacy on and we'll look forward to another memorial lecture next year. Now coming on to subject proper. This subject is extremely important from the strategic security point of view of India. As we know that J&K state, including the Union Territory of Ladakh, are vital to India's strategic security interests. Kashmir is also inherent to secular pluralistic idea of India, and it's also a symbol of unity in diversity. But since 1947, due to a variety of reasons, the state has been in a state of ferment. Post abrogation of Article 370, there has been a paradigm shift in the geopolitics of Jammu and Kashmir. And one of the stated reasons for this abrogation was to put the state on accelerated pace of development and really create or make Naya Kashmir a dream. But unfortunately, post abrogation, two disruptive events have taken place. First, because of the law and order situation, there had to be initial lockdown. And subsequently, we had a major strategic shock of corona, because of which this lockdown kept getting prolonged. As a result, certain projects which are under the aegis of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or the new package that Lieutenant Governor has very recently announced, probably have not been able to make an impact or move at a pace that it was desired to be. However, this effort is very much in progress. The government of India and the new administration in Jammu and Kashmir has taken certain initiatives. What these initiatives are, I'll request General Khatoj to enlighten on these initiatives. Coupled with this is a need for a reality check whether the people of Kashmir have accepted this new fait accompli and are moving forward with the Kashmir that is post abrogation Article 370. But at the same time, we need to carry out a reality check of the level of alienation, frustration, hopes, and expectations of people of Kashmir. We know that there is a Gupkar declaration, and they have put up a unified front as far as the mainstream political parties are concerned in regard to Article 370, 35 Alpha, Domicile Act, and delimitation. At the same time, the new Jammu and Kashmir Apni Party, there are issues of its acceptability and even their agenda of demographic change, job security, restoration of statehood need to be reconciled with the grand design or the strategy that the central government has in place. How this experiment of panchayat elections and block level elections, whether it's gained traction or there is a lot more needs to be done, is another issue of concern. But the most important at this juncture is that because of these two disruptive seasons, J&K economy has taken a big bashing. How are we going to recover and put this economy on the trajectory of growth? Other associated issues in J&K are how to reboot the political process, who are the actors and players, what are the nuances of delimitation, and a larger issue is that if Gilgit-Baltistan is declared as the fifth province of Pakistan, what impact it has on the constitutional aspects of Jammu and Kashmir. And what are the prospects of Kashmiri Pandits returning back to their homes? And the last but not the least is the roadmap for sustainable development. And I would request, among other things, General Ranbir to talk about what is Pakistan's new strategy of cross-border terrorism, what is a reality check on the indigenization of terrorism, what are his views on relieving army and RR units from the internal security duties or counter-terrorism grid in view of the challenge that we are facing both at the line of actual control and at the LOC. And if we talk about all government approach, then what are the changes, the strategic and structural changes that we need in our unified command setup? And lastly, I'll also request him to speak how to strengthen the national narrative on Kashmir, because there are so many inimical forces which are working on cross purposes. What should be done to build up an Indian narrative which is more constructive and positive? So with these few words, I'll request General Khatoj to enlighten us on government policies and programs. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar, everybody. It is indeed a great privilege to take part in the Colonel Pyarelal Memorial webinar and share my thoughts with this very distinguished audience. Now, when we actually look back as to what has happened since independence And when it is analyzed, say, 100 years from now, when we look into India's legislative history, I think two events will stand out. One is the First Amendment, which was carried out in 1951. And the second, which has been really a path-breaking event, is what happened on the 5th of August, 2019, when the special provisions which were given to the state of J&K under Article 370 were abrogated. Now, this has really been something earth-shaking in a way, because for very long, or ever since I started studying the subject, we were told it cannot happen. And ultimately, we find the power of parliament is so strong that anything is possible within the country, which really gives it great reason for hope. 1 year is too short a time really to judge the impact of the abrogation, both on the security situation and on the developmental program. Many times we hear this loose talk, even from people who are supposed to be experts in their respective fields, where they state, "Ek saal ho gaya hai, what has happened so far?" Now, there is no magic wand. I think once we understand there is no magic wand, we can really get onto the forward path and see how much has been achieved and how much we still have to travel on this road for development and peace. Now, from 5th August, or prior to 5th August, there were two main concerns as far as the state was concerned. One related to the security challenges, and the second was due to the lack of development in the entire state. Now, the security challenges per se were handled by the security forces in a manner in which, while there was no conflict resolution, at least the conflict was kept to a level by which other activities could carry on. But as far as the developmental program were concerned, there were serious challenges, and these have been addressed now to a very large extent. On the security side, in my view, I think the Pakistani establishment was caught by surprise with the turn of events, and it found its ability to foment terror in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and especially in the valley, greatly hampered. Now, this is, in my view, this has really occurred because the linkages which the ISI had established with the Hurriyat, and correspondingly the Hurriyat with the overground workers, and then on to the terrorists, the certain linkages with certain political parties, all this stood broken. And once the linkages stood broken, Pakistan found it very difficult and still finds it very difficult to propagate its agenda. That is why in the last 1 year, when I've carried out this analysis, though I will not be speaking on terrorism per se, but when I have carried out this analysis, the post-abrogation security environment has dramatically improved. The casualties suffered by the security forces has halved. The number of terrorists which are being apprehended has increased dramatically. And the hold which the Hurriyat had over the political system within Kashmir has weakened to a very great extent. In addition, as the police powers now rest with the center, there is no interference from the local politicians in security affairs, which has further diminished the clout which the terrorists earlier had. In my view, I think the security environment is promising, and we will every year, every month from now onwards, we will see a positive development. I presume that by the time we get to 2021 and 2022, it will be a complete sea change from what you are seeing even today, where there is an improved security environment. Now, governance issues. I think there has been a very great salutary impact as far as governance issues are concerned. The first impact, as soon as the special status stood withdrawn, there were 890 central laws which became applicable to the Union Territory overnight. 164 state laws were repealed, and 138 laws of the erstwhile state were modified. Importantly, the state or the Union Territory now came under the scanner of the Central Vigilance Commission and the Central Information Commission, which has led to greater levels of transparency and accountability. An immediate impact of the abrogation was the benefits which have accrued to senior citizens and children. Now, why do I say so? There were many progressive laws, such as the right to education and the right for the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2001. Then there was the National Commission for Minority Act, and there was an Act for Benefit of Women, Children, Disabled. All these became applicable to the state, to the union territory, which were not permitted to be applied earlier. And now the most vulnerable sections of the population, their concerns are being addressed. Another aspect, and which has been much spoken of also, when we are looking at the weaker communities, they suffered as enabling legislation, which was applicable to the rest of the country, was not made applicable to the erstwhile state of J&K. Now, there were no opportunities or no provisions to offer jobs to those sections of people who were very, very vulnerable. Here I speak of the Pahari community, the other backward castes, the economically weaker sections, and to those people who were living on the international border, bang on the international border and the line of control. Now, they were denied, all these people were denied their rights, which they were entitled to as per Indian laws applicable to the whole of India in terms of reservation in government jobs. Now, with the enabling legislation which has now come in, the government has offered jobs and some level of reservation to all these communities, which can now look forward to a better future. One of the crippling impacts of Article 370 and Article 35A was the notorious certificate of citizenship of the state. Now, it's a very funny thing that when we actually look at 35A, when we go back 10 years, there was no discussion of 35A, just 10 years from now. Many lawyers and advocates practicing in the Supreme Court of India, were not aware of the provisions of 35A. It didn't even find mention in the Constitution, in the written Constitution, though it was part of the Constitution. Now, this lacuna, I think, was very serious, and I'm very happy that this particular thing has been withdrawn now or repealed, and it has been replaced by the domicile certificate. Because what really the problem of 35A was, it gave the state the right to define who was a citizen. And that came, and then we got into the Citizenship Act. Now that stands repealed. Now we have the Domicile Act. The erstwhile Citizenship Act, it discriminated against certain classes of people. They were the West Pakistan refugees, the Valmikis, the Gurkhas. And I think all those discriminations now are set aside. It also discriminated against women. With the coming in of the Domicile Act, this problem has been eliminated. As mentioned by the director, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a very debilitating impact on the Indian economy, and the UT of Jammu and Kashmir was also not immune to the negative impact of COVID-19. But please remember, even during the crisis, the UT was in a position to spend over rupees 500 crores. At the same time, it was during this period, it has looked after 35 lakh people who were affected by the lockdown. Now, this, by any stretch of the imagination, is a tremendous achievement, considering the fact that the UT was also impacted very severely by terrorism. Now, there have been many good news stories which have actually emanated from the state, from the UT. Most of them are not known because we only emphasize on the negative. But I think one of the most inspiring ones is the way democracy has spread at the grassroots. Now, the panchayat system and the block development council, which were existing, they have been existing since independence, as far as the state of J&K was concerned. But they were never empowered. They were never made functional. So what has happened now? Within the rest of the country, we had the Constitution 73rd Amendment Act of 1992 and a new act, a new Part 11 consisting of 16 articles and the 11th schedule were also added to the Constitution. Now, the 73rd Amendment envisages the Gram Sabha as the foundation of the Panchayati Raj system to perform functions and powers entrusted to it by the state legislature. The amendment provides for a three-tier Panchayat Raj system at the village, the intermediate, and the district level. Now, this has been applied to the UT now, which has empowered the panchayats. The elected representatives of the people at the grassroots level, that is the panchayat level, are now enjoying the benefits of this devolution of power. The panchayats have been empowered and a sum of rupees 1,500 crores has been allotted to them. This has enabled the sarpanchs to carry out various types of development works in their respective areas. Most importantly, there is an element of accountability which has crept in, because the sarpanch is directly accountable now to the people whom he meets daily. Another landmark achievement has been in making the administration more responsive to local needs. Now, the Babus per se never really visited the ground to assess the ground situation, but that changed now. So to assess what is really happening on the ground, the UT sent 4,000 senior officers to each and every village of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, these officials were directed to spend 2 days and 1 night at the village, speak to the people, interact with them, find out what the problems are. And this has been done. Now, what is the impact? During this interaction, 20,000 development works were identified by the people themselves while talking to the representatives or by talking to the officials. These projects have been initiated, and as of now, about 7,000 of them stand completed, and there is some element of progress in the remainder. Now, it was not just the state officials who visited. As part of the Prime Minister's outreach program, 36 senior union ministers also visited various parts of the UT. Specifically, over 60 places were visited and they were inspected by these ministers. There was also an interaction carried out with the public. This enabled a free and transparent interaction where the public could state what was required in the areas and also highlight any deficiencies in government. The next important achievement, I believe, has been in the welfare centers. Prior to the abrogation of the special status, about 5 lakh people had been provided financial support through social welfare schemes. Post the abrogation, this number has increased by another 3 lakh people, which I think is a tremendous achievement. Now, again, the director mentioned the devolution package which the Prime Minister had given to the erstwhile state of J&K. This has now been carried forward to the UT. Now, unfortunately, when it was with the state, there was practically zero progress of implementation on the ground. And the delivery of all projects was very, very poor. Now, these projects have been taken on in real earnest, and many of them now stand completed. Many are still underway, of course, and all these projects which are still underway, they have been put on specific timelines for completion, and their progress is specifically being monitored. So what really has happened is accountability has been built into the system, and now we can have some concerned official who can be held responsible for slippages as and when they occur. We also had the problem of drinking water and rural roads. This has been addressed to a very large extent. As you are all aware, a project has now also been approved both for Jammu and Srinagar to have their own metro railway. When we are looking at education, there has been a 4-fold increase in the number of scholarships which have been given to minority students. The scholarships to those in the scheduled caste category have been doubled, including the post-matric scholarships. In the university, sports is now being given a leg up. A winter fest was organized for the first time in Gulmarg, and now sports will become a regular feature as far as the UT is concerned. Investments. Now, investment, of course, is always an issue which is very, very, very debatable as to how much of investment will actually come into the state and how much can the state absorb given its present disturbed conditions. Now, despite that, a large number of investors have expressed interest in doing business in the UT. How this actually evolves, I think time will tell. But it is my gut feeling that beginning 2021, we will see a large number of investors from outside the country and perhaps even from abroad coming into the state with various development projects. Now, it is also expected that most of the development schemes which have been taken place by the government, they will fructify in the very short term. Many of these complexes have been completed, especially the ones which the Prime Minister himself is monitoring. And the result of these can be seen directly by the beneficiaries. The major challenge which remains is employment generation. As of now, about 10,000 posts have been advertised and more than 50,000 are in the offing. But again, it is hoped that when private investors come in, the employment scene will take a dramatic shift. And I think a time will come, especially in the UT, where people will not just look to the government for jobs. Today, it is a government job which everybody looks for. But I think with the private sector moving in a big way, that will hold an increasing attraction for the youth in the time to come. Now, with this, I'll conclude. The UT, let's face it, has been going through very challenging times. The director very specifically mentioned we had terrorism, yes. We had a very severe winter, yes. Then came COVID, yes. And all these are continuing, right? But despite that, I think the prognosis for the future is very bright. I see a great deal of reason for optimism. I'm absolutely sanguine as a person who has dealt with the security environment that the UT is going to become a very, very peaceful UT within the next 2 years. And once that happens, I'm quite certain the development efforts will take off and we will see the UT becoming a state and then getting back to its pristine glory, which was there once upon a time. With this, I finish. Any questions we'll take on in the end. Thank you. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Jan Katoj, sir. Thank you for that very detailed account and putting it on a very positive note. But remember, three of us are from state of Jammu and Kashmir here, so we are very excited with these words, and let's see how the delivery is. And I'm sure Mr. Drabu here, who has been at the helm of affairs, will have his own thing. My purpose of this session here is we want changes to come about, positive changes to come about. And some of these projects that we have enunciated, these nearly need to be taken to their logical conclusion. If some change has to be made, we can't live in the past. So with these words, I think I'll now request Mr. Drabu to give us a way forward. We already know what has gone wrong, and all that victimhood and this kind of a misery and the bad stories everybody knows. But please give us a reality check in next about 10 to 12 minutes, and then rest we can address in the question answer session. Over to you, Mr. Hasib.
Thank you, Shama. Very glad that you made this intervention, because I was getting a little worried after hearing Major General Katoj, because we don't have a way forward. If what he says is right, then we already have a way forward. What has happened is dramatically different from what has happened earlier. We are discrediting everybody who has worked there for the last 70 years. And now suddenly there is dawn of a new era. I can contest every single fact, which I don't think is a fact. But that's not what I want to do, honestly. Because I think we need to understand where we are coming from. And I would request that we start looking at things not from a governmental perspective in terms of handouts of government, what is being said. I have run the state as a finance minister. I was economic advisor for a few years. I was chairman of the bank for 5 years. And before I was sacked as finance minister, the parliamentary committee, which does ranking of states, when I took over as finance minister in 2014, J&K was ranked 28th on financial management. Not by the state government, but by the government of India, the parliament. They set up a committee on this for all states. When I left, we were number 11. And I tweeted that day saying, now I know why I was sacked. So it's not that the work has not been done or the kind of stuff that's being said. But I want to look at the narratives that are being built and that are prevalent. And that too in a fairly autonomous academic institution which actually determines a lot of stuff. Because if this is the kind of what we believe is happening, then I must say I am worried. First of all, this whole issue of development of J&K, that it is underdeveloped, and it remained underdeveloped because of 370 and because of the government, elected governments, which were all corrupt, which were all anti-national, which were whichever way it was, and Article 35A, 370 acted as a development dampener. I will not quote a single figure from the government of J&K. I will only refer to statistics ratified by the government of India, produced by the Planning Commission, the Finance Commission, for which I had occasion to work on. And I'll give you 4 or 5 numbers. I don't want to get into details. I'll subsequently get into every detail that you want me to. Human Development Index calculated globally, standard form by the government of India, J&K stands at 0.688. National Index 0.64. We are better than the national average. J&K is better than the national average in terms of HDI. It is even better than Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Gujarat, just in terms of Human Development Index as an indicator of development. You look at the poverty ratio, 22% poverty ratio nationally, 10% in J&K. You look at any number that you want to. I will give you numbers on, let's say, child immunization or national average age, 74 in J&K compared to 68 nationally. 75% of children in J&K are fully immunized compared to already average of 62. Even Himachal has 64. Gujarat is at 50. Then why are we underdeveloped? Infant mortality in J&K 24 per 1,000. By global standards, still high. But by national standards, we are much better off. National standard is 34 per 1,000. We are 24 per 1,000. Nationally, we compare ourselves with Africa. In J&K, we are sitting next to Southeast Asia. So where is this thing coming from? 87% of the girls in Kashmir are in school compared to 65% in the best states like Gujarat. What is the unemployment rate? 5% in Kashmir, lower than nationally. So what index are we looking at when we are looking at this whole thing of there has been no development? It has, and now we'll bring in development. I agree with the issue that a certain section of the population, whether it was Valmikis or West Pakistan refugees or were being discriminated against, even women, yes, agreed, legislatively correct. They were discriminated against. But what percentage of population is that? 1%, 2%, 3%, not more than 5% in any case? We worked out a package. I worked out a package as finance minister. I negotiated with the government of India, the 80,000 crore package. We had a special package for West Pakistan refugees. And can I tell you what difficulty we faced? Not in getting the money, in spending the money. We didn't, the kind of numbers we had heard, we could not disburse it. We managed to disburse only some parts of it. This is ongoing. So let's not kind of take a position which is factually incorrect. And 370, the current regime in power has been saying for the last 70 years should go. I have no problem with that. That's a view, political view being taken. But let's not link it to developmental issues. Number one. Number two, again, I don't want to make it a debate, but it becomes a little difficult to not react. Legislative history, Katoj Saab said, 1951 to 2019. My position is very different. In fact, I would argue, and I have argued this, I have written about it, that Article 370, as it stood on 4th of August 2019, was the biggest fraud perpetuated by the government of India on the people of Kashmir. There was no 370. Where was it? It had been diluted in 1954. 51, jo keh rahe hain, that was origins. 54, mein constitutional order changed almost everything. In 1964, the Prime Minister of this country says we have virtually abrogated 370. Gulzar Nanda, the Home Minister, says the same thing, that it is as good as gone. What has happened? The optics of it is changed. Now look at it in terms of the whole point that we are now doing lots of stuff to prevent from 370. If today J&K has a better developmental record than most states in India, it is because of one thing, and that is Article 370. And let me tell you why, which is the land reforms of 1949-50. Article 370 allowed the government of J&K to initiate radical land reforms, restructuring of land relations, debt write-offs, which is unprecedented, not just in the country, in the world. Non-compulsory land reforms. That's what changed the agrarian poverty in the state, which has resulted in your better developmental record. It was possible only because of 370. Otherwise, the non-compensatory redistribution of land would have been questioned under Article 14. It was not possible to restructure that. In fact, what has been forgotten today, that was one of the principal reasons why 370 was put in, to allow those things to happen. So my point, sir, very humbly is, let's not try and retrofit certain things. Today, there are genuine concerns, not so much from my perspective, again, I've written about it, of what was done, but how it was done. Today, the entire federal setup of this country is under stress, under grave stress. And some of it does come from the fact of how 370 was abrogated. It's not about the power of parliament. Of course, power is the power of parliament. It's how you do this. Today, honestly speaking, I am not so much worried about what will happen to J&K as a consequence of 370 abrogation. I am worried about what's going to happen to the country as a consequence of the way this article was abrogated. Today, you have put such stress on the federal structure of this country, which had gained huge amounts after GST and after the first three budgets of this government. I, in fact, wrote about it, that this was the first federal budget of India, which was presented by Mr. Jaitley. We are talking of 1,500 crores to panchayats in J&K. It was started 4 years back by Mr. Arun Jaitley, who gave 3 lakh crores to panchayats. This is the biggest experiment of democratization of public expenditure in the world. We have to leverage that. It's not, and that is coming under question. Today we have a situation, sir, as an economist, I can tell you, where the fact that compensation of GST is being rained upon is going to cause a huge crisis within the setup, politically, socially. At the end of the day, the constitution is not just a document, it's a social compact. It's a political compact. Political compact between states and center, which is being violated. But the point that I really want to make today, and that is the only thing I would want this gathering to pick up and discuss, is that is the Kashmir issue, the problem, the conundrum, whatever you want to call it, only a problem of the government of India? I think it is a problem of the civil society of India. The J&K issue cannot be resolved by only governmental initiatives. There has to be a much larger program for this, which originates in the civil society of India. And the disengagement of the civil society of India from this issue is my biggest concern. And I've been saying this for the last 5-7 years. One of the reasons why I was sacked as finance minister was this: I spoke out at a seminar saying that it's not a political issue, it's a social issue. You need to understand how the country doesn't react to J&K. I look at academics. There is hardly any work being done in any university. There's tremendous amount of work which has been done on the economic model, the land reforms of Kerala, which came 5 years, 7 years after J&K. There's not a single work being done on how transformative things were done in J&K. No research is being done. No universities are working on it. So there has to be some engagement at the level of civil society, which will be the key for resolution of J&K. How you want to normalize the situation. Talk is made about investments. Sir, 370, 35A was never a barrier to any investment. You already had a lot of investments there. 1964, as early as 64, the Birla Enterprises is set there, which is still one of the largest enterprises in J&K. It's not about, and a point was made that not sure of how many private investment will go. It's not about this year, sir. Today, we are struggling to get investments in Maharashtra, in Gujarat, in Karnataka. Who do you think will go to J&K at this stage? But that's not the point. The point is what happened in terms of the earlier phases. The militancy starts in 1990. What happened between 1950 and 1990? Forget private investment. I'm not even looking at private investment. I'm looking at public investment. There are 339 central public sector undertakings. They employ 23, about 11 lakh people. They have investments of 24 lakh crores. Do you know how many CPSUs are there in J&K? There are 3 CPSUs in J&K. And do you know how much they have invested? 100 crores, 165 crores to be precise. And do you know how many people they have employed in J&K? 21 people. They did not face 35A, sir. They did not face 370, sir. They had no issues of land. They had no issue of regulation. Why was there no investment by the central public sector undertakings in J&K? There are 340 of them. They have invested 11 lakh crores, sir, the largest amount of investment in the country. What has been invested in J&K? 150 crores. Why? What is it that prevented investments? We will look at public-private investments much later. Let us look at public investment. What has happened there? Militancy comes after 90. What happened in the 40 years that between 50 and 90? Public investment is not driven by any profit motive. The major state developments that have happened, whether it is Orissa, it is Punjab, it is Maharashtra, it's not on the back of private investment. It's all on the back of public sector investment. You had Bafra Nangal in Punjab. You had a huge set of investments in Orissa, which led to the entire mining industry there. Tremendous amount. States like Maharashtra, West Bengal, Chennai, Tamil Nadu are all pre-independence build-ups. Post-independence build-ups are entirely driven by public investment. Why was there no public investment there? So the point I'm trying to make, sir, is let's do a bit of introspection. I can understand the current government in J&K. I will talk about Panchayat Raj. A lot of hope is being put. You have still not, sir, we are not able to announce, we did not announce who the winners were because of threat to life. Where are we, what are we talking about, sir? Out of 70% of those, I can send you the numbers, how many were elected unopposed. It goes back to 1951, when out of 75 seats, 73 were elected unopposed by that regime that time. A similar thing is being enacted now at the Panchayat level, Raj. There's no question of any devolution. And by the way, sir, 73rd Amendment came much later. J&K had a much better Panchayat Act, admitted by those who designed 73rd Amendment. But those are again issues of debate, discussion, perspective. Factually on the ground, no such devolution takes place. It cannot, because we are not able to provide a secure environment. All those punches, many of them have resigned, saying, we are not a part of it, because they are under grave security risk. So let's not, if genuinely you think that is true, then I am a worried man, because then you don't know the realities. I think I would please suggest that let's introspect a little more, try and see where one can move forward. What are the ways that one can do? Do not invite, and if you're looking purely into the developmental issues, purely, as I said, our track record development is much better than any other state. And I'm willing to discuss this point-wise in another forum, look at each of the specific elements and why it happened. There will be an obvious reference that, a lot of money has been spent in J&K, which is part of the issue, not the entirety. As I said, the entirety is somewhere else. So it's not that everything that has been done so far is wrong and everything that has been done now is right. There are pluses and minuses on either side.
May I request you? Yeah, just we're running little short of time, and we could.
I will just end with this: that let's not discredit the past to justify the present and hope for a better future. Let's try and understand the past, re-examine the present, and work towards a future that is desirable, livable for the people of J&K and also the rest of the country. Thank you very much.
My submission to you, Mr. Hasib, is that during the question answer session, we would request you to articulate your vision, keeping in view the ground realities now. We cannot go back in time that if what Gupta declaration is, I think it's a pipe dream. That if Gupta declaration says that we will go back into history and undo Article 370 or 35 alpha, that's not going to happen. My only submission to you is I have been born, brought up, educated. I've lost my relations to militants, and I have a lot of love and affection. But Kashmiris have to do themselves a lot of introspection. We ourselves have made blunders in doing up things there, and the introspection has to be from both sides. Then only we will be able to find a path which is actually uh, of a shared destiny and a shared future. You know, this blaming both sides. Jan Katoch has given you a government point of view. You are rooted in ground realities. You know facts and figures. But we need to move beyond that. And maybe I would request maybe Barrister Bhan, who is another son of the soil, to cover up on some of these issues and probably give us a way forward. How do we get out of this rigmarole and this gridlock and put the state on the path of development and peace? Over to
I
you.
just seek your
Ashok.
indulgence. One second, Shama Saab. I have to do a test for 5 minutes. I met with somebody who has tested positive. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Just excuse me for this. I'll just go and do a COVID test. I ran into
Okay.
somebody who tested positive.
Okay.
I just
Look
Thank you.
forward.
Very grateful.
Ashokji, request you to take us forward and not into the whirlpool of history. Please tell us what we should be doing. Over to
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. I think both General Koch and Hasib made very good presentation. And I have, jurisprudentially speaking, the matter is before the Supreme Court. And I am yet to argue. Therefore, I will not comment on the legality or otherwise of the challenge which is pending in the Supreme Court about the manner in which 370 was abrogated. Having said that, on the developmental issues, when Indira Sheikh Accord was done in 75, and Indira ji gave a perspective in the parliament and said that it is a golden era now for mainstreaming the Kashmir with the rest of the country, politically mainstreaming. And Sheikh Saab also said, Madam, I assure you that accession of India is no dispute, but only the quantum of autonomy we should be assured of. We will behave as good boys. And Sheikh Abdullah made a declaration after taking over as Chief Minister of the state. He said that henceforth let us give moratorium to politics and start on developing the state from where Bakhshi Ghulam Muhammad has left it. Since then, from 75 onwards, we have been on the path of development. And Sheikh Saab was one such leader who could manage very effectively and forcefully whatever he meant about the development. So I agree with Hasib Saab that nothing has happened for these so many years. It is only after 2019, 5th August, that everything is seemingly hunky-dory. And I don't agree with Hasib that it is not a political issue. According to me, it is a politico-legal issue. Politico in the sense that the same majority of the parliament incorporated Article 370 in the Constitution in order to accommodate some of the distinct features of the state which existed at that point of time. And from day one of its incorporation, the Jan Sangh and BJP started a campaign against that. And when they got a chance, they got a majority, they abrogated it. There is no quarrel. But what happened in the meantime? Meantime, from 89 onwards, there is a proxy war going on in Kashmir. And when I left Kashmir in 89 because of the security reasons, I was told that within a month, the law and order situation would be set right and you guys will come back and settle down back in your homes. 30 years have gone by, sir. And in the same argument that the situation is not conducive and secure for your return. I have a question for everybody. Indian state, the might of Indian state failed us then, and it is continually failing us now as of date, because it doesn't exert its will for our return, restitution, and settlement as a religious minority in Kashmir. It only takes the cover of militancy and law and order situation. I agree that situation is bad. But if you could exert the will and abrogate Article 370, if you could exert the will of the nation and go and lay the foundation of Ram Temple in Ayodhya, where is the will? Where is the exertion of that will to resettle Aborigine Kashmiri natives back in Kashmir? It's a very big question. And it's the moral, constitutional, and legal obligation of the current government, which talks all about the Hindutva agenda in this country, to settle us back. This is a very big question. I wish to raise it as the first question. Second question is, you said what is the way forward? Way forward is always a talk. You have an elephant in the room. Pakistan has entered Kashmir through militancy. It has its political wings active in Kashmir. And you don't seem to have either contested so fiercely and blunt them back to Pakistan, or you don't enter into any negotiation as a neighbor to them and talk on terrorism. You say talk and terror cannot go together. There are history. There are instances world over that talks and terrorism go together, go hand in hand. Number one. Number two, the population of Kashmir, the majority, the Muslim population of Kashmir, is agitational, is in agitation. They have some societal grievances to address. And those grievances are not addressed only by development. There is a political unrest in Kashmir. That political unrest has to be addressed. How do you do that? You do that by engagement with the stakeholder, by the dialogue with the stakeholder. And those over the years you had built as strategic politics, you put them behind the bars and put them in line with all those who ask for secession. So you are not, the current government is not having a very big vision to deal with Kashmir. Abrogation of 370 is one issue. Development is another issue. But as I said, Sheikh Abdullah's development agenda could not settle the unrest of Kashmiris. I don't think Modi's development can settle the unrest of Kashmiris for another, for now. It is not possible unless the unrest is addressed. Unless you address my unrest. I have also an unrest. I am living as refugee in my own country for last 30 years. In these enlightened times, in these modern times, and in this democratic country, and in this mighty country of India, which can take on China, Pakistan, and every country with its might, why is its might lacking in sending me, in facilitating my return back? Do I have not a right to life, living in my own house, in my own home? Why should I live as a refugee in my own country for last 30 years? 30 years is a long. आखिर विस्थापित कब तक? I am an internally displaced. So is my community. The only way forward, according to me, is an engagement. BJP puts up its point man. What did it do? Its point man negotiated a deal with PDP. They are experimenting in Kashmir. They got into PDP. Then they unsettled PDP. Now they are unsettling the mainstream politics of Kashmir and wanting to impose their own will of politics. It's not countenance. It's not possible in Kashmir. BJP as such cannot get into Kashmir. They cannot develop any roots in Kashmir. It is very difficult for them. That is why they are now using this King's Party. King's Party has no base in Kashmir. Until you talk to the stakeholder, there are moderates, there are peace-loving citizens. As Asif said, that you need to talk to civil society. There is a very robust civil society available for negotiation, available for talks, but provided you have the right intention to talk. And talks alone can lead us to some way forward. No amount of concessions by way of development. I'll tell you a very funny instance. When Jagmohan was there, he also started a development phase as governor. And in the social circles, everybody was saying that if he is doing development, he is burying 370 under it. We don't allow that. So the mindset of Kashmiri, it's a societal issue. It's an attitudinal issue. And until you change the attitude, and you have the disadvantage of a big elephant in the room, that is Pakistan. Until you neutralize Pakistan or get that elephant out of Kashmir scene, until you win back the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And mind you, sir, state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was built as a mosaic of a multilateral cultural entity, a political entity, was done away with, was bifurcated. What? For what? It was demeaned, and it has hurt further the psyche of Kashmir. Not much more than abrogation of 370. You have demeaned the distinct entity syndrome of Kashmir and Jammu. And what have you achieved out of it? Ladakh, China says that because of abrogation and bifurcation, you have hurt us and they are coming in Galwan. So therefore, I have a perception that it needs a policy correction. There is an amendment required in the policy perception of this government. We are not against this government. This government is with majority. It has 4 years to go. We cannot do anything about it. And it may be well intentioned to get into Jammu and Kashmir and create a good security environment and also blunt the enemies, but it needs a policy correction to the extent that it needs to appoint astute point men, not those. I am reminded where angels fear to tread, fools rush in. And what are those fools doing there? They sometimes give one statement, sometimes talk to Hasib Drabu to negotiate a deal of the government. Then sometimes, withdraw the support of Mahbooba Mufti, sometimes doing this, sometimes doing that, and sometimes castigating those strategic political assets like Abdullah and Mufti, saying that they are anti-national. Is this a correct perception? I'm asking this myself a question. Can a mighty Indian state behave like this in Kashmir and allow Kashmir to drift? Kashmir is in perpetual bleeding process for the last 30 years. And the might of India is not still prevailing there. If might of India had to prevail there, then Ashok Ban and his community should have been physically present in Kashmir. I was told 30 years back that the situation will be created conducive. It is not, for 30 years, it's not conducive. Where is it conducive? It is not conducive. It may be conducive for military point of view. And even the military commanders are saying, day in and day out, that we have done our job in Kashmir. It is for the political process to get initiated. Whatever the army could do, they are doing their job. They have killed so many of the top militants. What else could they do? They are doing it on a regular basis. The law and order situation vis-a-vis militancy is under grips. That is because of armed forces.
Ashok Ji, try and conclude, please. Hello. Hi.
So I think his bandwidth is low, so he's not been able to come in now.
So we can request him to come towards the end then, maybe during the question answer session. This debate ought to be sort of animated, because that is what Kashmir is all about. But I'm sure towards the end, we should be able to find out a way forward. We cannot remain in the pit of history, and that is my only submission. And with this now, I request General Ranveer to just enlighten us on how to achieve a sustainable security, which is a fundamental requirement for growth and development of the state. Over to you, General Ranveer.
Thank you, sir. All my respected elders, fellow speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Jai Hind and a very good afternoon to all of you. At the very outset, let me pay a very humble tribute to Colonel Pyara Lal, in whose memory we are having the webinar today. I salute his outstanding contribution to the field of academic pursuit. Subject. It's been nearly over a year now that Article 370 was abrogated in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. I'm happy that I got a chance for a little over 6 months to be with the people of Jammu and Kashmir, go through the situation post the abrogation, feel the pulse of the population post the abrogation, and see the genuinity of the government's instructions and directions and instructions on what we are expecting out of the state. How do we see the state transforming and becoming even more completely integrated with the national population? But there have been several quarters, whether it is the media, opposition leaders, some public intellectuals, who have continuously raised very serious concerns about the security situation and the state of normalcy post the abrogation in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. I appreciate that these views, they capture their fears and anxieties of the Awam primarily, but it is also the superficial understanding of a large segment of the population who are raising concerns over this issue. It must be understood that while from the military point of view, a large number of successful operations have been carried out in the last 1 year. But the absence of violence is not necessarily peace or normalcy. When the decision was announced on 5th of August, I think it is to the credit of our government and to our country, to our democracy, that the government has always been forthcoming in giving complete information on the update of the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. How many schools have opened? How traders, what business have they done? What is the development which has taken place or not taken place? This has been done both in the parliament as also outside, whether by the media or other agencies. It is undoubtedly clear what General Katoch also mentioned, that post the abrogation of Article 370, there have been reduced levels of violence, less street protests, less stone throwing, less traction to appeals of separatist leaders, reduced recruitment, less influence of Pakistan in triggering infiltration and terrorist strikes inside India, and more importantly, a large number of successful operations by the security forces, which has brought the violence levels in the state of Jammu and Kashmir to absolutely manageable levels. However, it is also true what Mr. Hasib mentioned, that there is a feeling of betrayal in the minds of some of the Kashmiris because of large number of checks which have been imposed on them, whether it is the arrests of political leaders, separatists, Hawala and money launderers, the Jamaati leaders in some cases who were spitting venom in the minds of the young Kashmiris, and a large number of such measures which came into place, including the stopping of the internet. I've had a chance to speak to a large number of Kashmiris after that. They would say, "Saab, ye galat ho gaya. Ye hamare saath dhoka ho gaya. This is not with bona fide intentions. This is not with malified intentions, but should have been with bona fide intentions." So that kind of a concern was there immediately after the abrogation was done. And it rested on the shoulders of the government, of all the government agencies, including the security forces, to be able to convey the right message, because people at that stage were possibly not prepared for a decision like this coming all of a sudden on 5th of August. And I must say that all stakeholders, whether it was the civil administration, police, army, all the sub-unit commanders, they were all issued the proper guidance wherein they would reach the sarpanches and the local people to be able to tell them about the benefits of the abrogation, and that to have patience to see the results of this abrogation, which will see fructification or bear fruit after some time. But what has happened is that these indicators, what Mr. Dabu also mentioned, they have become actually very big milestones as far as the optics is concerned. People expected an overnight change after the abrogation was announced or after some time of that. Unfortunately, the lockdown situation, the situation on the LAC has led to little reduced activity as far as initiatives of the government for actions to be done post abrogation were to take place. And we need to have patience, we need to have faith and complete commitment that it is a decision taken by the parliament, which has the support of the entire country, and we need to make it work. We can carry out mid-course corrections where required, because ultimately the aspirations and the pulse of the people of Kashmir and Jammu have to be taken into account so that we all have the ownership of this decision. We all work together to make this decision succeed. We have very often said that the military has been able to improve the violence parameters. Professor Bhatt also just mentioned that the military has created those conditions when any political initiatives could have been done, whether it was 2004, 2008, 2014. But now when we had been able to bring the violence parameters down, the government has taken a bold decision for the abrogation of Article 370. You rightly mentioned that most of the clauses of that had already been removed. It was almost a hollow article. So then we need to understand that why is the Kashmiri mind concerned? And as I go ahead, I'll be talking a little more on this, but we need to have the patience, we need to have the willpower, and we need to have the resolve to take this decision to its logical conclusion. I would also like to mention at this stage that any deviation, any one of us who are totally off this decision, it's a step which has been taken, and if we keep criticizing this, we are actually doing activities which are detrimental to India's national security, our diplomacy, and our development of political process in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. We need to have a nuanced and a cross-disciplinary understanding of this conflict in Kashmir. It has continued to remain a disturbed state for the last 30 years and even before that. And it primarily happened due to the Pakistan-sponsored militancy, an evolution of jihadi radicalization, and sometimes our inconsistent and incoherent policy, which could give some quick fix solutions to the problems in Jammu and Kashmir and failed to find an enduring and sustaining solution for meeting the aspirations of the local people of Jammu and Kashmir. From the security point of view, if I was to summarize that the security situation in Jammu and Kashmir is under control, however, it continues to remain fragile because this security situation, unlike in any other area, it is not only related to military, it has got psychological, it has got sociological and existential issues which need to be taken into account while we find answers for this. While the violence parameters have been down from August 2019, however, some of you would recall that towards the end of 2019 and some beginning of 2020, there were some sporadic incidents of violence of targeting outsiders, whether it was laborers, traders, CAPF, armed police force vehicles and columns, or some of the targeting of the SF security force informers. And I would say that this partial resurgence of disturbance after a very long quiet phase of public silence shows that the malaise somewhere deep down continues to exist. And Pakistan's terror, sabotage, radicalization infrastructure, they are firmly entrenched. His terror infrastructure continues to be intact. Terrorist camps continue to be there despite the pressures of the FATF. And I would say that this disturbance is largely due to the manifestation of Pakistan's proxy war with India. And now Pakistan is desperate to show its commitment and support to the people of Jammu and Kashmir and is likely to continue with this strategy of trying to push in infiltrators and carry out acts of violence and disturbance inside our motherland. And we need to keep a very solid check on this. But it is satisfying also to note that the pro-Pakistan constituency in Jammu and Kashmir is currently losing its credibility in the eyes of an average Kashmiri because they stand exposed and people now understand that they misled the ordinary people to fight and die in a delusionary approach of achieving azadi. And therefore, for us, it is very important that we have a cohesive, multidimensional approach to cater for this situation. A lot of it is already taking place. It is not really surfaced out because of the current prevailing situation of COVID. There is a cohesive approach of political, military, and diplomatic levels, all working in a very united manner in the unified command. I must say I have seen unified command structures functioning in a large number of states, but the unified command structure in Jammu and Kashmir is a very effective mechanism. All the concerned stakeholders sit together, even after post-abrogation of Article 370, every day, whether it was a Sunday or a holiday, every day the unified command would meet, discuss issues as to how the day has passed, evolve a strategy for the long term, and see as to what actions had to be done on the following day. And that is what led us to be able to maintain a semblance of normalcy, not let any kind of violence take place, and to be able to show to the world and to our countrymen that our security forces and the government structures are very much capable to be able to take on any challenge that could arise. But most important for us, the point about Pakistan, which I was referring, it is important for us to ensure that at the highest level, we should be able to decouple the Kashmir issue from that of Pakistan. We should be more concerned in addressing our internal aspects, the security, the development, the unsettled issues of Kashmiris and the Jammu and the Kashmiri Pandits, healing the wounds of alienation of the youth, which may be there. This action needs to be done promptly. So therefore, our approach for sustainable and enduring security is not to work on security issues alone. We could go wrong in case we were only to work on what the security forces are doing. Jammu and Kashmir is a very complex situation and therefore a very comprehensive approach, a balanced thrust, preparation to carry out mid-course corrections as and when required. Because the ownership has to be there with the government of India, with the Awam of Jammu and Kashmir, with the security forces and all the agencies which are working for the same common objective, so that we can usher in normalcy, we can usher in development, and we can have a good quality of life as far as the people of Jammu and Kashmir are concerned. I would rate 4 important issues. To my mind, like Hasibji mentioned, that the parameters and the indices as far as development are concerned are quite high as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. But today, I think where some amount of effort is required is to provide a healing touch and the balm to ensure emotional security for these people of Jammu and Kashmir. We need to put an effort towards this side by ridding the society of the deep-rooted psychological depression, low self-esteem, the feeling in the mind of an average Kashmiri that I am not being given the same attention as people in the rest of the country. And all of us need to put our heads together that we make them rise to the same level and be able to carry them forward along with us. The next is the cultural, environmental, and the job security. We need to create job opportunities, employment opportunities for the youth, because it is the youth which is the future of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We need to take them along. We need to keep the local traditions, both of areas north of Pir Panjal and south of Pir Panjal, and the cultural identity intact. They must have that faith that there is no erosion, no fault line which anyone could tend to exploit as far as the Awam is concerned. We need to ensure that environmental conservation is there, a well-calibrated program of reformation of the education system. We had all noticed in the past couple of years that the education system had started decaying, rotting, and there was a lot of negativism against the country which was being propagated through the madrasas and other places. We need to reform the madrasas, need to reform the educational system, schools, colleges, and universities, and get rid of the Islamist and the extremist content which is being propagated. A significant overhaul of the curriculum and the faculties is also needed of the institutions being run by the Jamaat-e-Islami. We found that a large number of Jamaat-e-Islami activists were involved in wrong activities, and that was one of the key reasons as to a lot of them had to be arrested so that they could not spit venom at when the abrogation was being done. But at the strategic level, we need to see also that at no stage the concerns of the people of Jammu and the areas south of Pir Panjal are lost sight of. They are the people who have worked from militancy and they have shown development. Those are the dividends of peace which are actually emerging in those areas. And we need to ensure that wherever security situations permit, whether it is tourism, ushering in, improving infrastructure, educational institutions, hospitals, better investments must be done so that the rest of the state also sees that wherever there is good security, where people stood by the government and the security forces and ensured that terrorism was eradicated, development has been brought into those areas in a very, very effective manner. However, as far as a military approach is concerned, this too needs to be finely interwoven with skillful diplomacy to isolate Pakistan internationally, force Pakistan to abandon the path of radicalization and terrorism, and a bold resolve to make the political costs of their misadventures unbearable for them. I know it is easier said than done, but I can only assure this august learned gathering that efforts are on at the level of the government to work in this direction. We are on the right trajectory, but everybody is prepared to give mid-course corrections wherever it is required, because ultimately we all need to work in this journey for complete integration of J&K into the national mainstream, usher in good governance, development, and improved security, which is an effort which we are working on. And I think at this stage, we should use the abrogation of Article 370 and the last 1 year, which is post that period, as the first step in our journey towards complete integration of J&K and towards meeting all the aspirations of Awam of J&K. Militarily, we must continue with our relentless operations against Pakistan, against an effective counter-terrorism grid in the hinterland to be able to take care of ensuring that no terrorists are allowed to move freely anywhere, and we should be able to bring terrorism to near manageable levels. We need to ensure that the local recruitment does not take place. Indigenization is something which Pakistan has always been fighting that and trying to claim that India is having indigenous terrorists. However, I would like to say that the last 2 years has actually noticed a steep decline in the number of local recruits. Possibly, we need to see this trend for a longer period of time. But Pakistan should certainly be kept guessing as to what are our next moves going to be. We have seen out of experience that the moment we give a lull to Pakistan, they try to put on that tap once again so that more terrorists are pushed into our territory. It is not going to be like that. It needs to stop, and we need to be very clear that such an activity shall not be permitted. A respected eminent person has also asked a question about the future of RR. We have our Rashtriya Civil battalions as an effective part of the counter-terrorism and counter-infiltration grid today. They are the key stakeholders. They have matured over a period of time and are an effective tool for the military to be able to conduct counter-infiltration and counter-terrorism operations. Whenever we need readjustment of grids by pulling out some regular battalions to cater for various contingencies, for example, the current situation prevailing along the line of actual control, the RR is able to quickly modify their grid and be able to adjust and adapt to the realities and take on the challenge in those places. I would like to finally conclude by saying that all these actions, which we just spoke about, these need to be covered under a very, very strong communication strategy. I think that is where sometimes we tend to fail, because we got to carry everybody along. There is no narrative which can only prevail for a section of the population of the country. Everybody has to feel that this is the national approach being done towards the state or the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Everybody is a part of that. We need to take the aspirations and the sentiments of the Awam of Jammu and Kashmir into account while evolving this national narrative, and thereafter be able to disseminate it not only to our countrymen, but also to the international community to show our resolve in being able to handle the situation. We should then have the ownership of the overall narrative. And finally, I think we need to put in efforts to make sure that this decision which has been taken is taken to its logical conclusion to meet the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you very much.